Two friends are in a Texas Hold'em poker tournament at a Massachusetts hotel. It's an annual event that they have both attended before.
It was the night before Thanksgiving, and Mr. Madonna didn't come home. His wife got concerned at 2 in the morning and called the police to report that he was missing.
Jim's son drives around town looking for his dad. It's not like Jim to disappear, not at all.
A search around their small town ends in a parking lot, with Jim's truck still running.
What Jim's son discovers inside is almost indescribable.
It's the night before Thanksgiving in Taunton, Massachusetts. A regular poker night in a local hotel draws two old friends to try their luck.
Jim Madonna and Tim Cassidy are almost like family. Tim's the cousin of Jim's wife, Pam. They go way back. Jim's even doing some part-time work at Tim's construction company.
Apparently it was a semi-regular event. Texas Hold'em was gaining in popularity, and both Madonna and Cassidy played there, but it was at least on a semi-regular basis. And they played that evening.
But Jim's wife, Pam, calls Tim as the night wears on, and Jim hasn't come home.
This is completely unlike Jim. Pam is used to him calling her regularly, even during a poker game. So when he goes radio silent, she's concerned, but when he doesn't come home at all, she panics. Pam, of course, has no way of knowing what's happened to Jim, but she suspects he may be out drinking. So she calls her cousin Tim to see if they're still together.
Tim tells Pam that they both left the poker game at 9:30 p.m. But Jim said he wanted to meet with former co-workers afterwards.
This has to be disappointing for Pam to hear because Jim had given up drinking for a while now, and his former co-workers work for a brewery.
I'm connected to this case because I covered the case from start to finish in Superior Court in Fall River, Massachusetts. I was a reporter at the time for the Taunton Daily Gazette, and Taunton is a small city just north of Fall River.
Taunton, Massachusetts. Founded in 1637 by members of the Plymouth Colony, it's one of the oldest towns in America and boasts a population of 60,000 people.
Even though it's an hour from Boston, it's still got a small town feel. This is a place where people put down roots and tend to stay for years.
It's here that Jim and Pam Madonna raised two sons, Matthew and Jimmy.
What they told me was that James was a real family man, very affable, very caring for his father, his other members of the family.
The Madonnas have been living in Taunton for 16 years. They really feel like a part of this community.
Jim wins a settlement from his employer for $10,000 after injuring his back on the job.
Madonna was out on disability, I was told. He had a back injury.
After working as a trucker for various companies, including a beer manufacturer, Jim works part-time now for his friend Tim's construction company while he's on disability.
Tim Cassidy is Pam's cousin and a longtime friend of Jim's. He's helping Jim out while Jim's on disability. It's just the kind of thing friends do.
Jim Madonna stops drinking 7 years earlier. But with the chronic pain of his work-related injury, Jim struggles with another addiction, to opioids.
Opioids like oxycodone are prescription painkillers that can be addictive. They tend to require a higher dose over time to get the same effect, so they can also cause you to overdose.
No one knows for sure if Jim is still addicted to opioids or not and how much he's struggling with this issue, but it really worries Pam, and that's why they keep in constant contact over the phone.
If someone is hooked on a substance, whether it's alcohol, drugs, whatever, they tend to hang on for a while. They're able to support their habit through income or selling of items or whatever, but eventually they have to find the money to support their habit. This is what leads to crime. This is what leads to borrowing money from families, bilking seniors. The whole litany of things that go wrong with addiction always involves money.
Has something in fact gone wrong with Jim Madonna due to drugs? And is money the issue? November 21st, 2007. Pam agrees to let Jim meet his friend Tim for a regular poker game at a local hotel.
The game starts at 7 p.m. After a couple of hours, Pam grows concerned that she's not hearing back from Jim.
Pam's son Jimmy tells her not to worry. He reassures his mother that everything will be okay. But when the clock strikes midnight and Jim still hasn't come home, Pam reaches out to Tim Cassidy.
Tim tells Pam that he played poker with Jim until 9:30. Jim then departed to meet friends from the beer company.
And he's still not home? Since it's now after midnight and Pam still hasn't heard from Jim, she begins to be convinced that something must be wrong.
When the clock strikes 2 a.m., Pam contacts police and sends Jimmy out to search for his father.
His wife got concerned at 2 in the morning and called the police to report that he was missing.
Pam doesn't feel she's overreacting. And in fact, it's not too soon to be filing a missing persons report.
In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, their policy is to be able to file a missing persons report when they are suspected to be missing. It doesn't have to wait the standard 24 hours that some jurisdictions have put in place. So in this case, they released a be on the lookout for, or a bolo, for Jim driving a red SUV.
As the sun rises, Jimmy continues to search for Jim.
Jimmy discovers that none of his dad's old co-workers have heard from him at all, so he obviously didn't go out for a drink with them. Something clearly has happened to Jim Madonna. It's like his dad has just vanished.
Jimmy Madonna enlists the help of his friend Tim Cassidy to search for his father, who's obviously caused a great deal of concern within the family because he's been missing for some time. They think something bad has happened.
They drove through the industrial park and didn't find the vehicle initially. After the first drive-through, they pulled in front of a convenience store. Cassidy decided to check one more time, one more spot, and they drove into a more secluded spot where there was a vacant building next to an occupied building, and the victim's vehicle was there.
The two men discovered Jim's red SUV parked all alone by an abandoned building in the Miles Standish Industrial Park. The driver's side window is open.
Cassidy instructed Madonna's son to go check the vehicle to see what was going on.
22-year-old Jimmy Madonna approaches the vehicle and notices that the motor is still running.
Jimmy probably hopes that his dad is just inside the truck sleeping, Or maybe that he passed out before he could shut his vehicle off.
The son walked up and found his father dead in the vehicle.
A horrified Jimmy Madonna frantically calls 911.
Jimmy and Tim find the red SUV running with Jimmy Sr. deceased, and they phone 2 911 calls in to the police within a matter of minutes.
The son at that point called 911 and was screaming that my dad is dead, someone shot my dad.
Police try to console Jimmy while questioning him for details. The entire scene is a truly horrific one for the young son to witness.
What Jim's son discovers is nothing any child should have to see.
Unfortunately for Jimmy and his mother, all these horrific elements will be thoroughly revisited in stark detail in the following days and weeks to come. Taunton, Massachusetts, Thanksgiving 2007. In the sleepy town of 60,000, a local poker game in an area hotel is one of the few sources of entertainment. 44-year-old Jim Madonna goes to the poker game and never comes home. A fearful night for Jim's wife Pam becomes a morning where Pam fears the worst.
Pam enlists the help of her son Jimmy and her cousin Tim Cassidy to find Jim's red SUV.
The next morning, Cassidy came to the house of the Madonna family and said that he would like to go out and look for his friend. And he went out looking for James Madonna with James Madonna's 20-year-old son.
Jim's best friend and son searched the town for him. They finally discover his vehicle in a secluded parking lot, still running, with the window open.
The son at that point called 911 and was screaming that my dad is dead, someone shot my dad.
He's in a parking lot, so you start to assume that he was to meet someone there or there was a random encounter with another individual.
When police arrive on the scene, they find a distraught Jimmy who has just discovered his father's body slumped in the front seat.
Blood covers the interior and windows. Jim Madonna has been shot multiple times at close range.
After getting the initial details and securing the area, police escort Jimmy away from the gruesome scene in order to lessen his shock.
So the police attend and they start their forensic investigation. They find he has been shot in the neck and in the back of the head. They would now be able to measure the trajectory of those bullets from the blood splatter evidence, be able to determine what transpired prior to his death.
It seems apparent to investigators that whoever murdered Jim Madonna took him by surprise with a first shot to the neck, and then while he was down, either incapacitated or trying to protect himself, the gun was placed at the back of his head and then fired repeatedly.
With all this information, police very quickly pieced together a theory about what happened to Jim.
So now you're looking at circumstantial evidence. The vehicle is parked with the window down, running. The occupant has been shot in the neck and the back of the head. He's in a parking lot. So you start to assume that he was to meet someone there or there was a random encounter with another individual.
The car is still in park and running, which shows there was no attempt to drive away. Police believe that whoever shot Jim Madonna got in very close and took him completely by surprise.
The bullet wounds combined with the blood spatter evidence tell police that the first shot took the victim by surprise. Then the shooter reached into the truck, pointed his gun downward, and fired execution-style shots.
The shooting leaves Jim sprawled out on the front seat of his vehicle. Police also recover spent .40 caliber shell casings inside Jim's vehicle.
Shell casings, when you don't have the weapon, are extremely important. They provide you numerous possibilities for evidence. One is the firing pin. Sometimes the shell casing leaving the cylinder leaves striation marks on the shell. There can be fingerprints on the shell. Plus, it gives you a caliber of the bullet. Possibly, if you find the box of bullets it came from, you can match those bullets up to the box. So shell casings, even though they look like a random piece of evidence, are very important in a case like this.
Police wonder if Jim Madonna's oxycodone use had become too much to resist.
When they examine Jim's cell phone records, they discover phone numbers belonging to people who sell prescription drugs on the black market.
In cases like this, the police have to develop theories. It's gut feeling or it's possibilities. So you look at, for example, in this case, you could assume that maybe it was a drug deal gone bad. He owed money for drugs, or they owed him money and something went wrong. And they start looking at that possibility to see if he had a drug problem, see if there was anybody that he was hanging around with who was a suspected trafficker who would possibly commit a crime such as this. So you start looking at theories, and there's numerous theories in every case. Obviously, they felt this was one to pursue.
But the robbery motive is quickly discarded when police recover Jim's wallet and cell phone still in the truck. 2 fresh cigarette butts are recovered outside of Jim's SUV. They're collected as evidence.
When police officers find cigarette butts on the crime scene, they know they found an important clue. They can take these cigarette butts, which have saliva soaked into the filters, and send them to a DNA lab for analysis.
Police track down locally known drug dealers, but each have an alibi that's corroborated.
Upon further examination of James Madonna, there's no evidence found that would support the theory that he had either been drinking that night or abusing opioids.
So in a case such as this, there's possibilities you look at. A person of interest. That's someone that may have knowledge or you think could know. Then there's a suspect, where you have some circumstantial or tangible piece of evidence linking that. They have nothing in this case. They have a vehicle running, the window's down, there's no broken glass, no sign of any force except the gunshots to the victim. So there isn't a lot to go on unless you start getting witnesses to come forward to link some piece of evidence to an individual.
The known drug dealers that police interview offer no obvious leads in the case, causing them to widen their search.
So now detectives are taking a thorough look at everyone who was close to Jim Madonna. Tim suggests that perhaps Jim's brother-in-law should be someone that they interview.
Police look into the whereabouts of Jim's brother-in-law, Kevin Hayes.
Unfortunately, many murder victims are killed by people they know. So it's natural now for police to start taking a close look at anyone who knew Jim Madonna, anyone who might have had any disagreement with him or a possible motive. And Kevin Hayes definitely fits that bill.
When police interviewed Pam's brother, Kevin, he openly admits that he doesn't get along with Jim, and they aren't on good terms.
Kevin's never thought that Jim is good enough for his sister. Years ago, Jim and Pam separated, and Kevin thinks they never should have gotten back together.
It makes perfect sense from a policing standpoint to look deeper into these personal connections. In fact, it's standard procedure.
In this particular case, there's no evidence that this was a random spur-of-the-moment assassination or killing. It looks like has to be some knowledge involved with the individuals, probably. You start thinking, is it a crime of passion? Is there extramarital issues going on that would cause that? Is it a money issue? Is it a drug issue? There's all of these things have to be now eliminated through a very long, complex process of interviews and evidence gathering.
Police investigate Kevin Hayes to see if he convinces Jim Madonna to park in an empty parking lot and await his own execution.
Everyone knows that Kevin and Jim don't get along, but Kevin says he had nothing to do with the murder. However, will the evidence prove that he's right?
Kevin cooperates with police, taking a polygraph test and a sample for DNA analysis.
When the DNA from Kevin Hayes is analyzed and compared to the DNA extracted from the cigarettes found at the crime scene, they are found to not be a match.
Kevin Hayes' alibi of being home with his wife and kids that night, in law enforcement, it's an alibi, yes. And you have to initially trust what the wife and kids say, but it is one that you would always keep in the back of your mind as being not airtight.
With Kevin Hayes eliminated as a suspect, investigators turn their attention to Jim's close friend, Tim Cassidy.
So the police would go back and find that they were playing cards. They said they had departed at 9:30. Tim Cassidy would have to now be eliminated as a suspect.
Police pore over the basic facts of the evidence once again in light of Tim Cassidy. And two things stand out. First, he was the last one to see Jim Madonna alive. And second, an anomaly in his alibi regarding his activities on the way home from the poker game likely points to a deliberate falsehood.
So he is now a prime suspect in all probability because of those two things.
His body was found parked in his vehicle in the industrial park, which is adjacent to the Holiday Inn. It's all the same large property. It's one of the larger, more prominent industrial parks in Massachusetts, the Miles Standish Industrial Park. The two had played poker at the Holiday Inn the night before, so they could place him in the company of James Madonna. So he would have to explain, he knew where the vehicle was. There were so many businesses in that industrial park that they couldn't drive into every driveway. So the last one they checked was this particular building where that vehicle was parked.
Is it just a coincidence that they found Jim's truck where they did, when they did? Police think not.
"44-year-old Jim Madonna is last seen at a poker game in a local hotel with his friend Tim Cassidy. Thanksgiving morning, 2007. Jim's body is discovered by Cassidy and Jim's son, Jimmy, as the victim of multiple gunshot wounds. Jim's vehicle is still running and all alone in an abandoned parking lot.
Tim's story of where Jim went after the poker game turns out to be untrue, and that's no surprise to Pam.
The victim's wife, Pam Madonna, told me that she always thought that Timothy Cassidy was more or less a pathological liar, that he was always telling tales, and that seemed to be a common thread.
In addition to operating the construction company, Cassidy owns 2 convenience stores in the area.
Tim isn't making any money off of his 2 franchises. In fact, he's planning to sell.
Pam Madonna tells the police that Jim, her husband, had loaned this individual $25,000, expected it to be paid back by Thanksgiving with an additional $5,000 interest. When this doesn't happen, there's obviously something going to occur between these two people.
He had told James Madonna that he would repay the debt, the total of $30,000, after he sold his 2 Tedeschi convenience store franchises and his small construction company. So this killing occurred supposedly the day before he was going to sell the businesses, but it also occurred on the day that he was, according to the agreement, to pay back the debt.
There's plenty of motive to make Tim a suspect in Jim's murder.
When police question Tim Cassidy, he gives them an alibi.
Tim tells police he made 2 trips after the poker game on his way home. First, he went to a convenience store to buy cigarettes, and then he went to a pharmacy to pick up a prescription for his wife.
Security camera footage shows Tim Cassidy entering a pharmacy at 10:05 p.m., the night before Thanksgiving.
The footage shows that Tim is probably telling the truth. However, there's a window of time left unaccounted for. between 9:30 p.m. and 10:05, after the poker game but before Tim arrives at the pharmacy.
Verifying Cassidy's claim that he bought cigarettes at a convenience store proves to be difficult.
So there's a combination of things happen here. There's some closed-circuit TV tape available. Tim saying that he went to a convenience store to purchase cigarettes, and when they review things and place it all together, the brand of cigarettes he smokes doesn't get sold at that convenience store, and his story starts to now unravel.
Cassidy maintains his innocence. When police ask him about the loan, he says he paid Jim back. But a check of Jim's banking information says otherwise.
Before Tim even claims to have paid him back, police know Jim didn't receive that money.
Tim has his own theory that he shares with police about what happened that night.
Tim claims that Jim's brother-in-law, Kevin Hayes, is affiliated with a local biker gang and tries to say that Jim is caught up in it as well.
Tim accuses Kevin of being the triggerman in a drug-dealing operation gone wrong, which involves the Outlaws, a local motorcycle club.
Kevin Hayes is the brother-in-law of the deceased, and the suspect tells a story where this Kevin Hayes is involved with a bike gang, and there's drugs involved. Now, this throws the police a curve. They have to now eliminate this story from their original path of investigation where they think they have the suspect, but he is now being coy and giving them an alternative story. You have to eliminate it for court purposes or it becomes reasonable doubt.
The confusion the suspect and his lawyer attempt to sow certainly works in their favor.
They tried to insinuate that Mr. Hayes and James Madonna owed a large debt to a local motorcycle gang involving a drug deal that never happened, and they had borrowed money and never paid it back. But besides that allegation, there were no other witnesses to corroborate that.
Police asked Tim Cassidy to take a polygraph test to verify his claims, and he agrees to take one the next day. On the day of the scheduled polygraph, Tim Cassidy is a no-show.
Tim must have known the walls are closing in on him. He just vanishes, leaving his wife and kids behind.
Someone emailed me a photograph of what appeared to be a much younger Cassidy. This was a guy who was reclining on a bed in a hotel room. According to the person who sent me the email, this was a graduation party, a high school graduation party photo in a hotel room. And it was Cassidy with bushier hair, but the face looked like him, pointing a large revolver towards the person taking the photograph with a slight grin on his face. And he said, the day that he met Tim Cassidy in high school until the day they finished high school, he was always telling tales and was always convinced that everything he knew was correct and right, and seemed to be sort of a megalomaniac or an egomaniac and a narcissist, perhaps.
Tim Cassidy is nowhere to be found. Anytime someone doesn't show up to verify their own claims, it raises further suspicion. But suspicion isn't evidence. So police obtain a search warrant and inspect the home of Tim Cassidy. When police execute the search warrant, they find his personal cell phone left behind. They also find a case of .40 caliber shells with 5 bullets missing from the box.
Now law enforcement needs to track down the gun that fired those 5 bullets into Jim Madonna.
Every case is different, and in some cases, you need a gun. The gun is what belongs to the person that pulls the trigger, matches the shell casings, matches the bullets that are in the deceased. It's not necessary to have the gun if you have a confession, if you have witnesses, if you have enough evidence on the side. The guns sometimes are never found. They're discarded in rivers, they're thrown in the garbage, they're burnt down, there's lots of things happen to them. But in some cases, it's the glue that holds everything together.
Tim Cassidy becomes the primary suspect in Jim Madonna's murder.
Tim's lies have caught up with him. He has motive, opportunity, and the bullet casings in Jim's vehicle match the bullets found in Tim's house. Now police just have to figure out where he is.
Police launch a nationwide manhunt for Tim Cassidy, ready to charge him with first-degree murder.
He was a fairly large guy, but I would say kind of husky, a little bit overweight, thick body, not obese, but not particularly threatening, no. And I think that might lend credence to the theory that he was able to convince people that he was trustworthy and he wasn't threatening. You could get close to him and not worry about it. That worked ahead to his advantage and the disadvantage of James Madonna. You have to watch out for the nice guys sometimes.
Jim thought he was going to get a very large loan repaid to him after the poker game, but Tim just took advantage of his trust, and now he's on the run.
There's many things motivate police officers. One is obviously your calling as a police officer. You wish to see justice served, which means catching the bad guys, protecting the innocent, doing good for the community. But there becomes a personal aspect to it as well. When you have victims and families, you want to make them happy by catching the bad guy and having the victims some comfort. And it's a matter of personal pride. When you have a case, you want it to go to court. You don't really care about whether you convict or not. You want to put enough evidence on the plate to let the judge decide. We should never care whether there's a conviction. We want one. But we should always just want to take it to the justice system and let the justice system decide. That's why justice is blind.
But Tim Cassidy wants to evade police for as long as it takes. The hunt for a murderer is on. Taunton, Massachusetts, Thanksgiving 2007. 22-year-old Jimmy Madonna discovers his father's body in the front seat of his SUV. Jim's poker buddy and employer, Tim Cassidy, becomes suspect number one in Jim's murder.
Tim continues to lie to investigators, and now he has a weak alibi.
Cassidy is a no-show for his polygraph test. He leaves his family behind, attempting to outrun the police. Tim Cassidy manages to evade the law for 2 full weeks. December 7th, 2007, in the small town of Pooler, Georgia. A credit card belonging to Tim Cassidy is used for a pizza delivery to a local motel. But instead of his pizza, Tim Cassidy is served with a warrant for his arrest.
Tim is now going by the name David Roberts. He's dyed his hair and grown a mustache. But for all his effort with this disguise, when police show up at his door, he just says, "You got me," and is apprehended without a fight.
Tim Cassidy is charged with the murder of Jim Madonna.
Well, the prima facie case they have here is a debt. The prosecutors would present facts that the money was loaned by the deceased to the charged person. They now have to prove he could not pay it back. This was enough of a motive to commit the murder. It's a difficult case to prove without witnesses, without confession, and without the gun, if they don't have that yet. So it's a difficult one if they don't have enough evidence. But prosecutors are very creative. They take what the police has given them, and sometimes they can get it in front of a grand jury and get a trial.
The case is really coming together for the prosecution, but one key piece of evidence is still missing: the murder weapon.
A break in the case comes when a jailhouse informant delivers the murder weapon to police. Authorities discovered that Cassidy hatched a plot to enlist the aid of 2 individuals. They were to go to his house, where the gun was in a paint can, move the murder weapon, and plant it.
Either in James Madonna's vehicle or in a shed or underneath a shed on the Madonna's property. Someone who had been sharing a jail cell with Cassidy had told authorities about this because Cassidy had tried to enlist his aid as well.
These two individuals were charged in connection with the crime, but the charges were ultimately dropped. Finally, this feels like the break that both police and the prosecution were looking for.
The case now seems like a sure thing for the prosecution. Once police find the .40 caliber weapon inside the paint can, now they can link Tim with the spent shell casings found at the scene. The motive was nothing more than financial desperation.
Cassidy's money troubles appear to run very deep, to the point that his 2 convenience store franchises were in jeopardy.
Who knows why he had these money problems? Bad business, gambling, or another addiction? As the case goes to court, one thing is clear. Tim owes a lot more money than what he borrowed from Jim.
He was going to get the money to repay the loan from selling his franchises. And he was already in trouble with the parent company of the convenience store. The regional manager testified that they had fired Cassidy at one point. Deposits were missing during that year, and they rehired him in a different capacity. Cassidy might have owed other people in the area as much as $60,000. It never came out in court as to why he was so much in debt, whether it had to do with drugs or women or gambling. That never came out. It's just that he found himself supposedly in a tight spot financially, and he was trying to borrow as much money as he could.
The prosecution asserts Tim executes his own friend, relative, and employee over a $30,000 debt.
Tim pleads not guilty. He's got quite the story for the court.
Tim Cassidy's defense accuses Jim Madonna's brother-in-law, Kevin Hayes, of the murder.
Law enforcement would have done a polygraph on Kevin Hayes. They would have proved that he was not the suspect in this case. He has an alibi. His polygraph confirms the alibi. The suspect that the police have continues to dump blame on him, and he starts to draw up this fantastic history of domestic sexual issues that would have led this fellow to kill Jim Madonna. And this is what the defense lawyer and the suspect take to court. It's a fairy tale, to say the least. And through the police work that they've done, they are able to point to him as the real killer.
In court, once he had a lawyer, he attempted to place blame on the brother-in-law of James Madonna. And he claimed that there was money owed, that the brother-in-law of Madonna hated James Madonna because he had accused James Madonna of cheating on his wife, who was the brother-in-law's sister, and something going back years before where he allegedly had inappropriately touched the brother-in-law's teenage daughter. Cassidy claimed that he handed the gun to the brother-in-law, who he claims was at the scene of the murder, and shot Madonna in the vehicle. And that's how it happened. But did not shoot Tim Cassidy, just shot James Madonna. And they left. Well, that gun was later found, and it was shown in court that it legally belonged to Tim Cassidy, and that he had bought the gun in 1995.
As the mounting and damning evidence is presented by the prosecution, the defense's alibi begins to break down. The strongest piece of evidence is presented next: DNA.
The prosecution's case hinges on the DNA evidence collected from the murder scene.
The cigarette butts are a different kind of smoking gun, so to speak. If the saliva extracted from a cigarette butt is tested for DNA, and that DNA matches a saliva sample provided by the subject, Our confidence level in that match is extremely high. There's less than a 1 in a million chance that the saliva collected from that cigarette butt could belong to anybody else but the subject.
For more than 4 years after the murder, the prosecution delivers their final version of events to a jury. On the day he's to repay Jim Madonna the $30,000 he's owed, Tim Cassidy says he'll deliver the cash after the poker game. Jim waits for his friend, expecting to get his money back. Instead, with the gun he legally owns and using bullets from his house, Tim Cassidy shoots Jim Madonna once in the neck, then 4 times in the head, execution style.
Tim Cassidy actually led Jimmy to the car so he could find his father's body. That's sadistic.
He was, I would probably say, unaffected and stoic. He took the stand at one time. He wasn't emotional. The only time he showed emotion was when the verdict came down and his head dropped down into his hands while he was sitting down. He just collapsed more or less while sitting down. But besides that, there was no show of emotion. I took all the photographs, and a couple of times he looked directly at me. One time particularly kind of a baleful look, an unfriendly look. Not threatening, but I would say describe it as baleful. When the verdict came in, there was some slight celebration among the family members of the victim.
The verdict comes down after 3 days of deliberation. Tim Cassidy is found guilty of first-degree murder.
Pam Madonna, Tim Cassidy's own cousin, calls him cold-blooded and vicious and says she will never forgive him.